Ain't That Good News? Great song. I hope you could hear the words in there. It goes along with the scripture that was just read. Come to me, all of you that are weary and burdened. But sometimes in our walk, in our faith journey, we feel weary and burdened. And then we might even ask ourselves the question, good news? What good news? Where is the good news? You know, we use that word a lot through worship and around church culture, good news. We hear it especially around Christmas. We get into it around Easter. But what is the good news? What makes it good? And I will say right up front, I think I alluded to it last week, that I have been reading N.T. Wright's newer book called Simply Good News, and I recommend it. It's not a very big book, a little skinny. You can get it in paperback, and I'll hawk it as much as that. But it's worth the read because it gets right at this point of what brings us together and how the church inadvertently may have slipped off the rail on the idea of good news. So maybe I got your attention with that. But let's say a little more. You're at wherever you go for breakfast or lunch, your favorite place, and you're eating there, and then someone bursts into the restaurant or the cafe or whatever it is, coffee shop, and says, "Folks, I have some good news." Now, this is a stranger. So what would that good news be? What would perk up our ears if we were sitting there wondering why the interruption? Maybe it was a new industry is moving into Grand Haven, bringing 1,000 jobs to the community. That would be good news. Or maybe there was something that had just been announced on TV that they had found a new cure for cancer and they just need to get the word out so people could access it. And maybe it could be more localized. The Grand Haven football team won the state championship. Good news. I don't know what's humorous about that. I was careful about that, but there's something up there that's going on. So anyway, but I'm glad you're, say what? Say it wouldn't happen? No. Now, I've given you some possibilities, but as you think through, what would be good news to your ears? What would that look like to you? And I won't ask for a show of hands or anything. It's not what that's about. But what do we interpret as good news? Now, I'm going to, because all those ideas aren't necessarily things we celebrate by good news in the church when we talk about that. But I do want you to think about it as we are in this season of Lent and we moving towards Easter. What was the good news for the people in that day? What was it for them? And you think about that for a minute, because it really begins to come post-Easter, because it hadn't all happened yet. They had a long ways to go on that Holy Week road that we celebrate each year. But what was the good news for those folks? It was true. Jesus died and arose on the cross, and that was good news. There was celebration for that. As the stories, as you read in the Gospel of John, all the reappearances of Jesus and all the good things that happen, moving right up to Pentecost. And I don't want to move us too far in the liturgical year, but yet that's all tied together with this good news thing. The good news for the people in the day was exhilarating. It was like nothing other that they'd heard or experienced. They went out excited. If you remember Peter when the Pentecost thing, and he preached and people were flocking to the church, and the church grew because there was such excitement. They saw the possibility because Jesus had died and arose and had set them free. N.T. Wright postulates that the church has lost its zeal for that original good news. He even goes a little further, and he's an archbishop in England, if you don't know his context, but he's written a lot of books and thoughts. But he said a lot of us have turned the good news in the church to good advice. Good advice. You think about it, you see titles, drive around, between here and Holland, and see church signs, and they'll tell you about, 10 ways to be a good parent, or 9 things to do for prayer in the morning, or how to be a better Christian each and every day. Those kinds of messages that invite us to come in to hear whatever it is they got to say. But they're all in the good advice column. But they're not good news. What is the good news? What is it that we ought to be exhibiting that seems to have gotten watered down over time? If we really understood good news, there would be such excitement we couldn't contain ourselves. You can think back in your life, when were you so excited? Maybe it was a Christmas morning when you were really little. Maybe it was when you met your spouse-to-be and all that goes with that. Those were good, exhilarating times in your life. We all have different benchmarks for that. But in our faith, what is it in our faith? In Jesus' day, choosing Jesus wasn't just about we'll create the dichotomy of heaven or hell. Well, we want to choose heaven because we don't like this one. Is that the good news? That we chose Jesus so we don't go to hell and we go to heaven? Is that the good news? For some, it is. A friend of mine, a church organist, all she was really concerned about was that her children, her adult children, would come to Jesus. It didn't matter what they were doing or what they did, but they could just say those words, then they'd be good because now they were going to heaven. Very dualistic, simplistic. I mentioned last week, and we say it in the Lord's Prayer, Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Now, here. Sometimes our Christian perspective is only thinking about that day down the road when we die and meet our Maker, or Christ comes and here we are. Because the good news is a reference that God sent his Son into the world, in his blood that was shed, sanctify us, forgive us our sins, which is part of what communion reminds us of. But for too many, it stops there. We got our foot in the heaven's door, or gate, if you will. And it dulls the effect of the good news. But I know there are many, that's all they want, and that's all they need. Here we are, April 2nd already. Spring has sprung. Robins are beginning to show up. I'd seen some quite a way ago and driving around. And my wife saw one Saturday, it was her first one, and then spring was legitimate for her. We know the feeling. But baseball starts this time of year, and whether you're a baseball fan or not is not the thing. It just comes with. And the big first pitch in the game and all that if you follow baseball. But I want to use that metaphor of a diamond. Home, first base, second base, third base. Most of us are familiar with that, whether it's softball or baseball. But I envision the metaphor for today in the church. We have people that start out, they're born, they come into the faith perhaps at some point in time, and at some point you say, yes, I want Jesus to be first in my life, and I'm going to do my best as a Christian. And I put before you this morning, that gets you to first base. And the picture I see is we have this huge crowd of people, masses of people hanging around first base. Not going anywhere, not preparing for anything more. They're just hanging around first base. And think about that. Because they were excited to get there. Oh, gee, I had Jesus. I got him in my heart. Here we are. Isn't this great? And the good advice things start to come in there because the enthusiasm wears off. I made it to first base, with Jesus, and then we get into, well, what does it mean to be here? And then we say, well, here's 10 clues about how to be here and live out your faith. And I'm not dissing all that unless that's it exclusively. But what about the other bases? What about the other bases? And my contention, and if you'll go with me with the metaphor, is that in our growth in faith, in our moving towards perfection, as John Wesley would talk about it, we have work to do after we get to first base. The goal is not to just stay there, yet many of us do. And as I travel around, I do a lot of Vital Church stuff in different churches, so I get the privilege of being with a lot of families of God. This is not an unusual thing. And if you wonder about, well, why is there a decline in churches today? I believe it's because we have hung around first base too long. And that we need to move around. So if you go with me with the metaphor, moving around means figuring out what are my gifts now that I'm here. What has God given me that then I can take out into the world? And I believe that if we have any sense of our enthusiasm dying off, it's because we haven't figured that piece out, and yet it's there pushing us, pulling us to figure it out so that we can live in the Spirit 7 days a week, not just on Sunday, but 7 days a week. Getting to home plate, that's what that is. That's the sanctified life, getting to home plate, where we are living in the Spirit of whatever God has called us to do. Not everybody's called to be a minister. Not everyone's called to be a missionary. But people are called to teach. People are called to be hospitable. It's just the list goes on. But it is part of our job, especially if we claim first base, to figure out what we are supposed to do as disciples of Christ. I believe that when we start to think that way, life gets a lot more interesting and exciting. A lot of churches, I don't know if this church has one, has a church softball league where it's kind of an intramural league against other churches, Men and women can play, and, you have fun. You try to win. Once in a while, a harsh word is spoken, but all in all, it's good fun. And in the newsletter, I'll report how well the baseball or softball team did in the last month. We don't get too excited about it because it's just our local team, right? But I submit to you that that's kind of the first base way of playing. And what God expects us to do is He expects us to round those bases to the point where we're in the professional leagues. Now, in professional leagues, wins and losses count. There's a lot at stake, money mostly, but we're not going to go there. That there's a lot at stake to win and lose, and people keep track of things. In our church life, it's no different. We're in the serious game of life here. This is not a casual game. You just show up when you feel like it. This is a game not, if I don't show up, so it's going to be punishment, lightning bolts. No, it's not that. But it's, I need to be renewed, refreshed in my faith and in my spirit so I can go back out there to serve God wherever He has called me. That zeal, I don't see all that much. What I do see, and I'm not talking to you because I'm not here enough to say anything personal about you, but just in a general way, is that we come to church, okay, we did our thing, now we can go back to whatever it was we were doing. There's where we lose our zeal and churches begin to decline. What we do celebrate and we get excited is when we see a person roll into our midst that's been invited, or somehow we have come with, and their life isn't going the way they want for any number of reasons, but they come in and they find a community of faith that says, hey, you're welcome here. Hey, you need some help, we can help you. You need prayer, we can pray for you. And you see a life that comes in beat down and then comes, like the scripture says, you come here to get rest, to get renewed, but ultimately get transformed. And that power is what I think people get excited about, and I get excited about, and I hope you do too. Some of you may remember the disciple Bible study that Methodist churches were doing, I don't know, 20 years ago or so, and you may have gone through it. But I remember I went to a workshop where the fellow that had began the disciple one, he had put it together. And he said, I knew that Bible study failed the minute I saw Cokesbury releasing Disciple 2, Disciple 3, Disciple 4 Bible study. You might say, well, what's up with that? I might have taken all 4 of those. But he said Disciple 1 was designed it was a school year study. It had homework and everything. It was very intensive. You had to actually study, not just show up. And you study, and then in that you learn what God calls us to do, who God is, how the Bible works together, and then you look at what are your gifts and graces? What's God given me? And the third part of it is you're sent out to do, to be. When Disciple 2 came out, it meant people wanted to study more than to use their gifts to go out and be. And that's the first base syndrome, is what I call that. You see, we are about the world to make disciples, not Christians, but disciples who are Christian. And that whole run into basis is all about making disciples for ourselves and for others. This morning, I encourage you as you come through the latter part of our Lenten season, if you haven't, to begin to think about what has God called you to do. What kind of work is before you?